All right, so if any of you are here from the local DAR chapter and have, and boy, these cell phones can be really addicting, but I jumped down to give this talk. So I'm hoping that you enjoy the people that I picked out and tell you about. We're going to be turning the lights off, only because it will make it easier for you to see the slide. The first lady that I'm going to talk about was born Phoebe Ann Mosey in 1860, and she stood just 5 feet tall. She learned her hunting skills by hunting food for the table because her family was very poor, and she became an expert marksman. In fact, she became so good that she won a contest against Frank Butler, who was another experienced marksman. She eventually ended up marrying him as well. She also met Chief Sitting Bull in 1880 and in her later years. So this one is a kind of short and sweet, but this young lady was born in Senegal. She was kidnapped and brought here on a ship named the Phyllis. As you can see, it's spelled Phillis, when she was just 7 years old. She was given the name Phyllis and then Wheatley for the merchant who purchased her. And that was at the age of 7. But that merchant was very progressive and noted that she had a very inquisitive mind to learn, even though she didn't speak the English language. And so he allowed her to be educated. She was reading Greek and Latin, and at the age of 13, she was starting to write poems, but in the English language now. No one believed that she was the actual author of them. And so at the age of 20, she was questioned by a court of 18 men who were in wigs and robes, and she had to recite from memory passages from Virgil and Milton, some verses from the Bible, and had to vow that the poems that she had composed were not copied. She underwent a lengthy examination until the court approved her. The Sun, she needed sponsorship to produce a book of her poems. And so that actually was able to take place. And then she came back home, but not until after she had written a poem to King George II. When she came back home to America, she was 1776. And she was the first African-American writer to publish a book in 1770. Who we're going to talk about. But I don't know about you and what you learned in history actually went all the way up, and part of it actually went into the, and they're called the Corps of Discovery, which is actually a subset of the Army at the time, and sent out the gentleman you always remember as Lewis and Clark, Meriwether Lewis. And Lewis and Clark actually went up, and we'll see if this works here. And of course, who is Charbonneau's wife? Washington area, and was able to speak in her tongue to the various Native Americans to help them accomplish their trek. The return trip, you can see there was some divergent paths, the little red lines. The one is William Clark, have notebooks of Lewis and Clark. And the birth of Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau throughout the trip, baby. This is a monument to that fact at Fort Mandan in North Dakota. Following the expedition, when they returned home, Sacagawea and her husband, Charbonneau, spent a couple of years living among the Hidatsa tribe before accepting an invitation from William Clark to return to St. Louis, Missouri, where he was. And that's, you can kind of see when they go back to St. Louis, Missouri. Once they returned back there, she gave birth to a baby girl, Lizette Charbonneau, in 1812, And from everything that I can find, that was the same year that Sacagawea passed away, that she died. And so Charbonneau turned over the education of the son to William Clark, who enrolled him in one of the academies in Missouri. And then there are actual, so had passed away, and William Clark adopted the children of Sacagawea and Charbonneau. Mary Robertson. And as a child in a one-room school, she took an interest in drawing and coloring throughout the school term. She used, at home, she would make mixtures out of lemon and grape juice, sawdust, lime, flour paste, anything that she could use at home to make her paintings and her pictures. And what she said later in life was, I was quite small, but my father would get me and my brothers white paper by the sheet. He liked to see us draw pictures. It was a penny a sheet and lasted longer than candy. But by the age of 12, she was not. Her family had hired her out to be a domestic for local farmers. And she did that for 15 years until the age of 27 when she finally married and started a family of her own. And she and her husband were able to purchase their own farm. She was quite busy. She had 10 children, but only 5 survived to adulthood. She was well known for yarns and crafts, embroidering, quilting, and giving those away as gifts. But when arthritis settled in, she could no longer do that. So her sister suggested that going back to painting would be easier on her hands. And at that time, she was 76 years old. And that's when her painting career began. Do you know? Grandma Moses. So she began her painting at the age of 76. And between the age of 76 and when she died at the age of 101, she completed over 1,500 paintings. She initially sold them for $3 to $5 a piece. She placed them in local drugstores. And then one day, an art collector saw them, and he purchased everything that was in the store. He then set up an art display for people to come in, and her paintings became even more popular, and he began selling them, and soon they were bringing over $1,000. And there was one particular one in 2006, and it's one of her paintings put on a 6-cent postage stamp. In 1953, she was on the cover of Time magazine. And these are some of her paintings, some pictures of some of her paintings. She said in her biography, I look back on my life like a good day's work. It was done, and I feel satisfied with it. I was happy and contented. I knew nothing better and made the best out of what life offered. And life is what we make it. Always has been, always will be. All right, what are girls good for? Well, according to an article in a local Pittsburgh newspaper in 1885 titled, What Are Girls Good For? Having babies and keeping house. So enter one Elizabeth Cochran. Elizabeth Cochran was 18 years old at the time, and she was so displeased with that article that she wrote an anonymous rebuttal to it. However, the editor was so impressed by what she wrote that he put an ad out in the paper asking her to identify herself. And so she did. She contacted him, and she was hired on the spot. And that's where her interesting life begins. Her passion was investigative reporting, but she was usually assigned more feminine topics like fashion and cooking. But at the age of 21, she left for Mexico on a dangerous report on people. And again, in trouble, she fled the country, but later published her findings in a book. At the age of 23, she was hired by Joseph Pulitzer, New York World, where she began an undercover project that made her famous. She wanted to investigate the New York's Women's Lunatic Asylum. So she took on a fake identity, checked into a boarding house, and faked insanity. And she was so convincing that she was committed to the asylum. Her report of her 10 days there led to important reforms in the treatment of the mentally ill. The following year, she took and that was a solo trial. Yep. And the custom of the time was for female reporters to use pen names, and that was the one they gave her, taken from a Stephen Foster song. And then this is a picture of her. All right, women involved, planes, trains, and automobiles. So who do you think of if I say the first person to fly across the Atlantic? Have you ever heard of Beryl Markham? Yeah? So in 1936, fishermen in Nova Scotia found her wading through a bog with her plane crashed. And she said, "I've just England." Her destination was New York City, so she considered herself a failure because she didn't make it to New York City. But that wasn't the case. She became the first person to actually fly nonstop across the Atlantic from east to west, not west to east, as Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart did. So she came against strong winds, against weather, and landing on the American soil. She was among the greats of actually congratulated by Amelia Earhart, and they got her to a motorcade through the city, a suite at the Ritz-Carlton, where she pronounced, "America is jolly grand." And so basically, her story is found in the book, West with the Night. Margaret Wilcox. So she was born in 1838, and she was one of the first that while riding on a train, it was pretty cold. Fingers were cold, especially when the temperature dropped. And there was no way of really getting things warm in there without all your clothes on anyhow. So she realized that the heat that was generated by steam engines was being wasted. And so she devised this elaborate set of pipes and ductwork to move the steam into the cabins and places and capture the warmth of that steam. Now, it went and became a patent in 1893, and unfortunately, it did not have any heat controls at that time, but it became the precursor for the heaters that we know today. It took a time for car manufacturers to adopt it, but by the late 1920s, car heaters became commonplace. And so, this winter, when you're nice and toasty warm in your car, thank Margaret Wilcox. Another one, and there's not a lot that I could find on this, but Mary Anderson, whenever it was snowing or window. And he removed it. But the car company didn't think it was worth investing until after her patent expired. But it paved the way for safer driving and modern-day windshield wipers. All right, I think I told somebody there was something on the slides up here. So behind every good man is a good woman telling him what to do. So our lady that we're talking about graduated with a degree from Oberlin College in 1898, and she secured a teaching position teaching Latin in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. She managed the family home, managed the cycle company, took on extra work to keep food on the table, and encouraged her brothers even when the outside world doubted. Does she look like anybody you know? Catherine Wright Haskell. Now? Yeah. This is the Wright brothers' sister. And after the first successful flight in 1903, she left her teaching position to assist them. She managed the business behind the scenes. She responded to reporters' inquiries, answered questions from the public about the science of their invention, and handled Orville and Wilbur's social calendar. She also accompanied them throughout the world and took flights with them to encourage more people that this really was something that they should try to do and accept, and made it more popular. After Wilbur died in 1912, she became an officer at the Wright Airplane Company. She continued to travel the world, was active in the fight for women's suffrage, and dedicated time and financial support to Oberlin. History remembers the Wright brothers for changing the world, but behind every blueprint, every breakthrough, and every bold fight into the unknown stood their sister, Catherine Wright. More women's inventions. Okay, when do you think dishwashers were invented, or when did you first use dishwashers? What? 1812. He's actually not that far off. I don't know about you. I grew up, I was more the dish dryer, not the dishwasher, but we didn't have one when I grew up. And I think Craig and I were probably well into our marriage, at least probably 10 years before we actually got our first dishwasher. So probably in the late 70s, close to 80. Anyhow, Josephine Cochran, who was an American inventor, born in 1839, she conceived the concept of a mechanical dishwasher as a solution to the problem of servants damaging precious china. And she secured a patent for her dishwasher in 1886. So overcoming the taboo of a woman going alone into a $100 for her position in Chicago. Her company was eventually and with her 1916. Okay, remember your good old manual typewriters? Most of you probably used one at a time when you made a mistake. You had to start over. And what if you used carbon paper in there? hard to erase the carbon paper. Well, in the 1950s, a single mom and secretary decided to fix the problem of the typos. And this is her. Her name is Betty Nesmith Graham. And she mixed up batches of her correction fluid in a blender in her kitchen. She used empty fingernail polish bottles to put it in, and she called it Mistake Out. And it worked so well that her boss never noticed the corrections. However, she worked so hard on it, she got fired from working too hard on her invention. That product we know today as liquid paper, and her son, Michael Nesmith, of the Monkees. Stephanie Kwolek, not a whole lot to say here, but she was a chemist, and while working in 1965, so not all that long ago, she created a super strong, lightweight fiber. What she was really researching was strong fibers for car tires, but realized that this was something more. It was 5 times stronger than steel. Her discovery has saved countless lives and redefined safety gear, and her invention was Kevlar. Now, women, believe it or not, had a lot of role in many of the wars, and I'm going back all the way to the Civil War. So our first lady was sensitive, warm-hearted, and very shy, and she spoke with a soft voice. Her parents suggested that she get into teaching and be a teacher. That way, maybe she would overcome being so timid. So she did. She became a teacher for about 10 years. And she was so successful at that job that the school that she opened in New Jersey started with just a few kids and grew to the point where they actually needed a school board and a principal. But being a principal was a man's job. So they hired a man, and she soon left being a teacher. So she moved on to a new field. In 1855, she became the first woman clerk in the patent office and received a salary equal to men. She was abused and slandered by the men and eventually fired the following year. So when the Civil War started, she wanted to get more involved, both on and off the battlefield, nursing soldiers, assisting with treatments, reading to them, writing letters home to family, and boosting spirits. And at times, her life was in danger, and she wrote, "I shall remain here while anyone remains and do whatever comes to my hand. I may be compelled to face danger but never fear it. And while our soldiers can stand and fight, I can stand and feed and nurse them." All leading to her being called the angel of the battlefield. And we have Clara Barton. That's right. So after the war was over, hearing that many family members of missing soldiers were not getting answers from the War Department, she contacted President Lincoln, who appointed her to correspond with the families. She and her team would reply to 41,855 inquiries and help locate over 22,000 missing men. And then she went to Europe, where she came across the Red Cross organization, working with leaders, and was responsible for expanding it to the United States, where she led for over 20 years, resigning in her 80s. And that's a picture of her later in life. Now, our next young lady worked with resistance groups during World War II to help defeat the Nazis. At the age of 50, She rode her bike and delivered resistance newspapers, which she hid by stuffing them in her woolen socks and in her wooden shoes. She would walk through the woods giving secret messages to paratroopers and guidance to those in need of shelter. She was fluent in English, Dutch, Spanish, French, and Italian. And at age 16, during the Battle of Arnhem, she was a volunteer nurse in a Dutch hospital where she cared for a British paratrooper named Terence Young, who later became a film director. She's one of 14 people in the world to be a member of the EGOT Club. And she sang at President Kennedy's final birthday party in 1963. Anybody know? Who? Audrey Hepburn. A lot of people guessed Marilyn Monroe because they picture her singing to President Kennedy. But yes, Audrey Hepburn was the lady that we're talking about. And of course, she went on to star in many, many films. Our next lady, Sarah Edmonds, known as the Master of Disguise and Civil War hero. She was originally from New Brunswick, Canada, and she left home at the age of 16 to escape a dysfunctional family. And she also did not want to marry the person her parents thought she should marry. So a year later, she immigrated to the US disguised as a man to make traveling and make it easier and securing employment easier. And when the Civil War started, she enlisted in the Union Army, served as both a nurse and a spy, all under the assumed name of Frank Thompson. She took on many disguises to enter the enemy territory for her spying missions, but unfortunately she developed malaria, and she left the state to go get treatment. Upon returning back after she was discharged, she found out that the Army declared Frank Thompson a deserter, and so that ended her Army career. She continued on as a nurse, published her memoirs, and started a family. But unhappy about her record, she petitioned the War Department for a case review, and in 1884, a special act of Congress granted Sarah E. Seeley, and that was her marriage, an honorable discharge plus a veteran pension. She was one of 400 women successfully enlisted in the Civil War. And there is a book that is written, and it's called Liar, Temptress, Soldier, Spy, and it's about 4 women in the Civil War. And it's very extensively documented with notation and references of where. But it talks about Belle Boyd, Emma Edmonds, Rose O'Neill Greenhow, and Elizabeth Van Lew, and the things that they did and how they went undercover to help the Civil War. I also there will be one of these books as part of the raffle in October. So if anybody's interested in reading that book. Well, this lady, during World War II, worked as a covert operative for the Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor to our CIA. She was assigned a top-secret project in a makeshift lab, and she dove into the challenge. What she was tasked to do, so German U-boats were a constant threat, and they were seeking ways to stop these German U-boats, and also sharks in the water were setting off the bombs meant for the U-boats. So she was tasked with finding a solution to the problem and to come up with something that would repel sharks without harming the environment or alerting the Germans. She said it was a challenge that ignited a spark in ways she never imagined, and her first big recipe was shark repellent mixed in a bathtub for the Navy. When put to the test, it worked like a charm. Anybody? Julia Child. Yep. It was Julia Child. Our next person is Josephine Rogers Miller, who was born in 1836, and she lived with relatives Peter and Susan Rogers on the edge of Emmitsburg Road in Gettysburg. And you can imagine what's coming, because then the shooting began when the Civil War came to her door. At that time, she had bread in the oven when the shooting began. Peter and Susan fled the farm, but she wanted to wait till her bread was done. And so the smell of freshly baked bread attracted the hungry soldiers, so she sliced and distributed the fresh bread, and with the bread gone, the hungry soldiers wanted more, so she decided to mix another batch. And she kept baking and slicing and feeding and taking care of soldiers on both sides of the war. She was told to leave because she was in danger, and she promised to do so, but she couldn't stand to hear the cries of the hungry soldiers, so she continued to work. And following the war, she ended up marrying her neighbor, William Snyder, and moved to Ohio. In July 1886, veterans of the Battle of Gettysburg reunited. Surviving members of the 1st Massachusetts gathered to unveil their monument on Emmitsburg Road, just south of the Rogers house. The house still bore scars of ferocious fighting, bringing back memories of Josephine's kindness. The 1st Massachusetts discovered that she was still alive and living in Ohio, so they paid for her train passage, invited her to Gettysburg as their guest of honor for the opening of the monument. She was awarded several military decorations and made an honorary member of the 3rd Corps, the only woman to achieve that distinction. They returned to the old farmhouse. And before I get to there, these were just some newspaper articles about the story of her, about staying in the house, and after the war was over, how many dead bodies they found from people who had crawled in that couldn't survive their wars. But they brought out her stove, and this is Josephine in front of, and you can see just the edge of the monument there. And they retrieved her stove, placed it in front of the regiment's monument, and she was photographed along with many of the soldiers that she had helped during the war. During World War II, the government requested women join the ranks of the military so more soldiers could join actual fighting. And most branches had women reserves except for the Marines. So in February of 1943, they came on board with Be a Marine, Free a Marine to Fight. The new recruits were dubbed Glamarines and Femarines. And with her parents' permission, Bernice Frankel enlisted. She went to her training in New York, where she learned the basic training, and then they sent her to the Marine headquarters in Washington, D.C. as a typist. She wasn't exactly happy about that, and she felt that she could do more than just be a typist. So she requested to transfer to the Motor Transport School at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. The request was granted in June of 1943. A year later, she married and served from 1944 to 45 at the U.S. Marine Corps Air Station in North Carolina as a driver and dispatcher. Now, unfortunately, she had one misconduct report. She contracted a venereal disease, leaving her incapacitated for duty for 5 weeks, and she was punished with a dock in pay. But at the end of the war, she was honorably discharged as a staff sergeant. Her official military personnel file said she showed meticulous good taste, was known for being over-aggressive and argumentative, which fit well with her future role as Dorothy Zbornak, otherwise known as B. Arthur from the Golden Girls. We have some women who left their mark on history. So born Nancy Green as a slave in 1834 in Montgomery County, Kentucky, she was a slave to the Samuel Johnson Walker family. And by the end of the Civil War, she had lost all her children as well as her husband and lived in a wooden shack. She ended up moving to Chicago with the family, and at the recommendation of her owner, who was Judge Walker at that time, she was hired by the R.T. Davis Milling Company in St. Joseph, Missouri. She was the first living trademark at the age of 56. She made her debut in 1893 at the Exposition in Chicago as the spokesperson for a new ready-mixed, self-rising pancake flour. She demonstrated the pancake mix and served thousands of pancakes, becoming an immediate star. Nancy Green, better known as Aunt Jemima. And of course, these are older pictures of Aunt Jemima. As we now know, they have changed the name to the Pearl Milling Company. Someone wrote, "A remarkable woman, sadly erased from future generations by politics." But she maintained her job with the Milling Company until her death in 1923 at the age of 89. Mary Fields. She drank whiskey, swore often, smoked handmade cigars. She wore pants under her skirt and a gun under her apron. She was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. She lived in slavery for years of her life until slavery was abolished. Then she worked for several different families in both Florida and Ohio. When she was 52, a close friend of hers developed pneumonia, and so she traveled to Montana to help nurse her back to health. She decided to stay in Cascade, Montana. To make ends meet, she opened a restaurant, but she was too generous, and so the venture failed within a year. In 1895, when she was 60 years old, or over 60 years old, she became the second woman and the first African American to work as a mail carrier. She got the job because she was the fastest applicant to hitch 6 horses. She never missed a day of work, and she became known as Stagecoach Mary. She was so liked in the town that she was in that the schools all closed on her birthday. She was given special permission by the mayor to enter any saloon she liked any time. I suspect part of that had to do with the gun and the size. And she babysat all the kids in town, and she retired, spending time running a laundry and doing the babysitting because she was. Ruth Graves Wakefield. In August 1930, Ruth Graves Wakefield and her husband bought an old Cape Cod house built in 1709 on the outskirts of Whitman, Mass. At one time, it was used for a toll house, and they started an inn called the Toll House, and I know you know where this is going. She had a lot of wonderful recipes at her inn. She was famous for lobster dishes and thin butterscotch nut cookies that she served with ice cream, but she tried something new. She cut small pieces of chocolate from a Nestle's chocolate bar and added them to the dough. And she named her cookie the Toll House Chocolate Crunch Cookie, and became so popular that newspapers around New England began publishing the recipe. During World War II, soldiers from Massachusetts put the cookies in the air. As the cookies grew in popularity, noticed that sales of their chocolate right. This is a woman after my own heart because she did for $1 and a lifetime chocolate. In 19 never was one to follow the rules, and when she became pregnant, she did the unthinkable. She insisted that I Love Lucy write pregnancy into the script. So on January 19th, this feisty actress In the episode, Lucy Goes to the Hospital aired on the same day that Lucille Ball gave birth to Desi Arnaz Jr., shattering all the taboos and making 4 million viewers tuned in, making it one of the most watched episodes in television history. Some great Lucy quotes. I would rather regret the things that I've done than the things that I have not done. The secret of staying young is to live honestly, eat slowly, and lie about your age. A man who correctly guesses a woman's age may be smart, but he's not very bright. And once in his life, every man is entitled to fall madly in love with a gorgeous redhead. Now some just for fun things. So her daring defeat on October 24th, 1901 remains one of the most remarkable stunts in history. She was born in 1838. She was a widowed schoolteacher facing financial difficulties when she conceived the idea of going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. She hoped to achieve fame and fortune. No one had ever attempted to go over the falls and live to tell the tale. So to prepare for the stunt, she designed a custom-made barrel, which was padded with a mattress and reinforced to withstand the immense pressure and turbulence of the falls. She tested the barrel by sending it over the falls with a cat inside, and it survived the plunge. This gave her the confidence to proceed with her plan. On the day of the attempt, Annie Edson Taylor climbed into the barrel, her assistant sealed it shut, and the barrel was set adrift on the Niagara River and eventually reached the edge of the Horseshoe Falls, the largest and most powerful section of the Niagara Falls. The descent was harrowing. The barrel plummeted 167 feet into the churning waters below, enduring tremendous forces as it was tossed and battered about by the rapids. Miraculously, Taylor emerged alive, though bruised and shaken, but her survival is a testament to both her courage and the effectiveness of her barrel. She spread quickly, and she became an instant celebrity, earning the nickname Queen under the Falls. However, despite her newfound fame, her financial aspirations were not realized. She struggled to capitalize on her achievement, facing challenges in monetizing her story and securing lucrative opportunities. Her manager stole her barrel, and she spent much of her later years trying to recover it and make a living through public appearances and souvenir sales. But unfortunately, she died in poverty in 1921 at the age of 82. Mary Smith, nobody really famous, but I thought this was, it just intrigued me to read this. So in East London in the 1930s, waking up clients for a fee so they wouldn't be late to work and lose their jobs. And some of those employed in this job banged on doors, but then they soon realized, hey, if I'm banging on this door, the neighbor's hearing it, and they're waking up and not having to pay me to do this. So she solved the problem by shooting dried peas out of a pea shooter against the windows. She charged 6 pence a week for her pea shooting service, and she became one of the most beloved characters in the East End in the 1930s, with her nearest competition being 3 miles away. She was so loved that she had her own children's book written and named after her. These women were affectionately known as knocker-uppers. During World War I, as men were called to the military front, American women artists began to replace them and worked on camouflage projects for the military. The Women's Reserve Camouflage Corps was a specialized unit of American women artists formed to design and test camouflage techniques for the military. They focused on creating apparel for gunners and scouts and snipers to blend in with trees and rocks and various landscapes. They also painted optical illusions to disguise like boats and cars, and you can see some of those being painted here. Between the spring of 1917 and November of 1918, the women had painted more than 2,300 vessels. Nets of brown and green burlap dyed to match the foliage were sewn together and draped over or in front of machinery, and uniforms covered soldiers from head to toe in burlap suits embellished with raffia palms. The rock suit was designed to keep a wearer safe from detection at a distance of 10 feet, and the observation suit was designed so they could blend in with the sky when needed, or they could turn the suit inside out to blend with snow and ice. And I have some pictures here which are kind of intriguing. This is the insignia for the U.S. Army Camouflage Corps in World War I. You can see them zipping a woman into one of the rock suits. I don't know if you can find her on the slides. I have a couple more slides for you to look at and see if you can find these camoufleurs. There's just some dressed in their suits before they're being placed. This one's kind of obvious on this side. You can tell. This one, I never did find someone. This one I can tell because of the legs going down that you can see for the rock. And now you see her, and now you don't. Well, I have a bonus for you. Not that I'm going to talk about it because I could talk a whole hour just on this person, and Sally will love this. But did you know the first woman president, the first woman to be nominated for president to the U.S. was Worf? She believed in free love, equal rights, was married 3 times, was arrested several times, ran a successful brokerage firm in New York thanks to Cornelius Vanderbilt, published a scandalous newspaper, but eventually became a well-respected woman in England. And that person is Victoria, California, Claflin Woodhull. And so I have put together a handout for you so that you can enjoy reading about Victoria Woodhull, because she led quite an exciting life. Back in 1985, there was actually a presentation here on Victoria Claflin Woodhull. It's a pretty good written book, and we still